Happy 2024 and welcome to the winter season premiere of Chicago Newsroom 2.0. I'm your host, Andy Zopp. As we step forward into a new year of hope, and thanks to a sure-to-be contentious presidential election, a year of critical uncertainty, we'll pause tonight to take a look back at some of the biggest news stories of 2023 with two of our favorite roundtable guests, Jamie Nesbitt Golden from Block Club Chicago and the host of 3 Questions with, Hugo Balta. But first, in this week's one-on-one segment, I'll be joined by the Executive Director of Illinois Humanities, Gabrielle Lyon. We'll get started on the other side of this short break. Stay with us.
Hello, I'm Kimberly Loftus, and I am financially secure. I have made it my business to help you achieve the same financial transformation for 2024.
Whether you're in abundance or not in abundance, if your mind is centered around money, then you know something's wrong.
In the Money airs on Thursdays at 7 p.m. on CAN-TV 19, cantv.org, and on the all-new CAN-TV Plus app. Experience the power of community television.
For nearly 50 years, Illinois Humanities has worked throughout the state to make the public humanities accessible to all. Through grants, partnerships, and public programs, they have worked with groups of all sizes, disciplines, and stages of development to increase their local and statewide impact and support the state's cultural ecosystem. Joining me to discuss the organization's deep commitment to providing transformative humanities experiences for all Illinoisans is the Executive Director of Illinois Humanities, Gabrielle Lyon. Gabe, welcome to the newsroom. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Andy.
So let's start with, what is Illinois Humanities? What's your mission, and how do you work and you're statewide, so how do you work in the state?
I mean, Illinois Humanities is statewide. We're a nonprofit organization, and if you believe that the kind of thing we're doing, having a conversation, encountering ideas different from ours, getting to experience arts and culture together, if you think those things are actually important, that's what we do. And that's really what our mandate is, to make sure everybody, especially in places that otherwise might not have access to the humanities, that they're available. So we do that through grant making. That's what we opened our doors with almost 50 years ago. We do that with education programs for income eligible adults, and we do a lot of discussion-based public programs.
Oh, wow, that's amazing. So for my audience who, humanities is a broad concept and topic, talk a little bit about what public humanities it means.
I mean, I think a lot of people might have encountered humanities in high school or college and maybe didn't have a good experience. It can be your disciplines, art history, philosophy, journalism, literature, poetry. But for us at Illinois Humanities, it's really about all the things that make us human. And a lot of times I talk about it like this, you can make a painting and be an artist. Public humanities is when we get to talk about, well, what does this mean? How does it make us feel? Or you can read a book or watch a movie. You can do those things by yourself. But for us, it's about creating the spaces to come together and talk about those things. And part of what happens when we have a conversation is it actually makes us think about our own ideas, our own identity, maybe differently, more richly, and especially now, going into 2024, being comfortable with things being complicated, that's a skill we all probably need to work on.
A lot.
A lot.
A lot. So I have a couple questions that came out of that, but my first one is, you may remember a few years ago, I ran for office, statewide office, and when I ran, one of the things I learned is that it's a really big state. I think people don't really appreciate how big Illinois is. So how do you work across the whole state? Because and it's different, right? Let's just, the downstate people tell you they're like, Chicago's a different country. I don't think it's as different as they say, but it is different. So
Yeah,
how do you
I mean,
have that impact across the state?
Well, the first thing is we have 102 counties.
Right.
And what I try to remind myself in my role is you can say that a county is red or a county is blue from a political standpoint, and the truth is no one county is all red or all blue.
Right.
And that's a really important thing to keep in mind in our work, and I think for ourselves as a state. I think the second thing is, it's really about local. At the end of the day, it's about, day after tomorrow, I'm going to be in Havana, Illinois. People don't realize we have wetlands. People may not realize that we are a state that has some of the most important indigenous sites in the entire country. So part of the work that we do is to amplify what is already here and what's already in place. And the second thing is to really strengthen the relationships that cultural organizations and the people doing arts and culture have with each other. So sometimes that means giving a grant to let people do the work they already want to do. And sometimes that means bringing visibility to the work that's happening and making it stronger.
Right. Well, also, and then the other thing I wanted to talk about is just the impact, how you touch so broadly. And the example I wanted to give is really COVID relief. You did some work related to COVID and using COVID relief funding. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Illinois Humanities, we're a nonprofit, but we're also the state partner for the National Endowment for the Humanities.
Oh, okay.
So when federal relief funds were made available, we were one of the groups charged with distributing those funds. And I am very proud of how quickly we got the money out, what we were able to do with those funds. And for example, we made grants to nearly 400 organizations.
Oh my God.
And those
That's a lot of
it's a lot of
That's a
organizations. But it let a couple of things happen. Number one, it let us really get a snapshot of the constellation of the kinds of places that are out there. And then secondly, that COVID relief money illuminated some really critical things that I think it's important for us to know. 60% of arts and culture organizations, including in Chicago, don't have access to broadband. So think about how much we talk about hybrid and Zoom increasing access. Well, if you don't have reliable broadband, you can't do that.
That's amazing to me. I mean, I know there are neighborhoods where it still is a big issue, but 60% is a huge statistic.
And again, including Chicago and Cook County, I think there's two other things that the moment of COVID really illuminated. When we think about arts and culture, these are organizations that are ethnic organizations that are first language organizations. So when COVID hit, a place like the Chicago Cultural Alliance, for example, we're providing mutual aid, food relief, all access to resources because they're trusted. So in addition to the arts and culture work that they do that's critical to their mission, in communities, these are the places that really know their communities and serve as anchors. And most of the organizations we funded were serving people who were hit hardest by COVID and who also were under economic duress before COVID happened. So even think about the cultural organizations in our own city. Those are places that have been operating and continue to operate. And during COVID, they really rose to the challenge.
Right. Well, I think you touched on this really early on in your remarks that local and community-based makes a difference. And just because you're an arts organization doesn't mean that you can't have an impact and don't have an impact broader to the needs of the community that you're serving. Right?
Yeah,
and how
absolutely.
important it is to fund
Absolutely.
that. So speaking of kind of that broad base of humanities organizations, you fund an organization called Justice Grants for Organizations, or you're part of that program?
One of our pillar programs is called Envisioning Justice.
Okay.
And that is where we provide funding for arts and humanities and community organizing to really shift the narrative about the impacts of mass incarceration. So that shows up in a couple of ways. We've created exhibits, we've commissioned works, but I can give you a couple of examples of what that actually means. I mean, Sonia Henderson, for example, is an individual artist, and she really works with mothers who have been personally impacted because they've lost children due to violence. Right. And so we've funded her to do projects called the Mother's Healing Circle. She's done all kinds of art installations in North Lawndale, but she does it with community members. Nice. Illinois has been in the news a lot because of our bond reform. and community bond reform and things like bail justice. So we fund places like the Chicago Community Bail Fund, where they do campaigns in communities just to help explain, well, what even is the Pretrial Fairness Act?
Right.
So some of this is really using arts and culture at the intersection of policy, safety, things like that.
Wow, and incredibly powerful. We are running out of time,
Okay.
so I know you're having a big convening in March of
We
this
are.
year. Can you tell
We
us quickly what that's going to be about?
I mean, Chicago is going to be home to the first ever national convening of humanities councils and their community partners to really think about how do we do local work and connect it to national change so that we can really better support reentry, safety, justice, and really reimagine alternatives to mass incarceration. And the reason I'm so excited about that is because it really is in line with some of the recommendations that were made to Mayor Johnson's in administration coming in the transition committee. I was on the transition committee, and I think really the task ahead of us is putting the arts and humanities at the center of the conversation, because that's how we're going to be stronger. That's going to strengthen our civic fabric. And, you know, being able to host this convening is one way to put ourselves on the map, but also leverage the extraordinary resources and examples we have right here.
Wow, well, this conversation was too short, but incredibly powerful.
Thank you.
Gabrielle, thank you for so much, all the work that you're doing
Thank you.
with Illinois Humanities, and thank you for being here today. We really appreciate it,
Appreciate you.
and we appreciate everything you're doing. And we'll be right back with the first roundtable of the new year.
This week on Change Agents, we'll meet a couple of leaders who are striving hard to provide housing, resources, and services to unaccompanied youth and families from Chicago's west and south sides who are experiencing or at risk of homelessness.
We need to remember that we can all prosper here.
Join me Thursday at 7:30 p.m. on CAN-TV 19. Stream us live on cantv.org or watch us on the CAN-TV app. Experience the power of community television.
From the election of a new mayor, NASCAR racing on Chicago streets, an influx of migrants seeking here in Chicago the safety that the state of Texas refused to provide, the dismantling of affirmative action, continued attacks on the rights of women to control their own bodies, and the right of free people to read freely. A former president bound and determined to test the outer limits of democracy, and a COVID pandemic that flat out refuses to gracefully exit stage left. 2023 was one doozy of a news year. Joining me tonight to take a look at the stories and issues that most impacted Chicagoans last year are two journalists I always enjoy spending time with, Jamie Nesbitt Golden, reporter for Block Club Chicago, and the host of 3 Questions With here on CAN-TV, Hugo Balta. Welcome, Happy New Year, and let's get back to talking about the news. So I'm not a headline writer. I'm always impressed with when I read the news and the headline writers sometimes they get really snappy. But if you were gonna write a headline for 2023, what would it be? Hugo, I'll go with you first.
Well, first of all, Happy New Year.
Thank
Happy
you.
to be here. A headline, I think for us at Illinois Latino News, it's the migrant crisis, right? So humanitarian crisis in the southern border overwhelms Chicago.
Yeah.
I think that every story that's been covered till to today, it's about how overwhelming it's been with finding them housing. Now we're knee deep into the winter. We're going to be below in this coming weekend, and where to house them, providing them the essentials for them to pick themselves up is still a struggle. And as we're circling to the 2024 elections, it is going to be front and center both at the local and the national level.
Okay, so we're going to circle back to you. So for you, it's all about the migrant crisis. Okay, Jamie. So
sort of taking a look nationally, I would say America gets it wrong for the 247th year in a row. Like, I mean, we keep sort of declining and going backward.
Yeah.
And I think last year particularly showed us, or the last 2 years rather, with the nullification of Roe v. Wade, and last year with the dismantling of DEI, the war on books, a president, like you say, that refuses to go away, and a government that refuses to sort of hold him accountable. I'd say we're in pretty dire straits. So I'm a little wary about what 2024 will bring.
Right. Yeah, I think, so for me, the title would be something closer to that. Like, democracy and crisis, our Bill of Rights being exploded. I mean, I do think that incrementally we are, we had a lot of things happen that are really, chipping away at pieces of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. And because, like so many things in America, in the United States, when you do it like that, chipping away, nobody pays any attention until it becomes until it's like a disaster. Because I'm equally thrown by, I'd be really interested what you all as journalists see. I'm like, what else does Donald Trump have to say about what kind of president he would be before people get freaked out? I'm like, when you go, I'm gonna be getting revenge, and people are like, yes, that's terrific. I'm like, well, that's good. Unless he decides you're the person you need to get revenge from. I'm thinking, it just blows me away. I don't know, Jamie. I mean, I'm just kind of like, I know you like him, but do you not
again,
get that?
What exactly? I want folks to be very clear about what they like about Trump. And I mean, again, he's sort of been the id for a lot of folks who see him as like a savior of white folks. I mean, I think that's really what it is. And he does the grievance politics thing very, very well. But I don't. It's really hard for me to understand why people are so enamored with this man. And also, Trump is a pretty horrible supervillain in that, like, he will tell you his plans.
Right.
Like he's telegraphing every move, and folks are just like, oh, okay, well, seems reasonable enough. Let's, sure, he wants to destroy democracy. Let's go there because, somebody took my job because of affirmative action. Like, I mean, it's all very crazy conservative Mad Libs over there. So
I don't know, Hugo. I don't know. Where do you think's driving that?
I think it's reality TV, right, at its best. I think people enjoy the noise, and I think media perpetuates that narrative. It's not real till it's real. He's leveraging democracy to destroy it. I think we can look at Venezuela as an example of what happened to democracy in that country. A very populist nationalist candidate with Hugo Chavez that was very popular because he spoke to the mob.
Right.
And so I think people are not going to get tired of it. I think he's on his way to being reelected President of the United States, and we're not going to know, we meaning in general, we're not going to know what trouble we're in until after the fact, until it's too late.
And to Hugo's point, I think we're seeing like a rightward shift globally, right? We're seeing a lot of countries sort of go full fascist. And it's a little disturbing in that, people have been protesting, people have been marching, they have been doing their due diligence. But again, if a government is allowing stuff like this to happen, particularly we're seeing it in France and Poland, what else? What can people do to fight back? What else can we do to fight back? I think people are feeling powerless, fatigued, just everywhere. And again, I don't know how we can sort of fix this. It's going to take folks who are willing to do the work, but I'm not really sure if people are willing to do that,
Let's go back to a little bit about 2023. We know what your number one story is. What's your number two story? Because we're gonna come back to your number one story, but what's your number two story?
The election of Brandon Johnson.
Okay.
I think in our focus is about who showed up to vote. We live in a city and primarily a county that's made up of African Americans, Latinos, and the white population. But when we look at for us at Illinois Latino News, the Latino electorate, well, once again, they didn't show up. Right. And those that did show up, it was pretty divided between Johnson and Vallis. But nonetheless, as we walk into 2024, that conversation we have every 4 years, are Latinos going to show up to the polls? I think historically and statistically speaking, there'll be an increase of voters from this electorate, but they still will not realize their true potential.
Really? Wow. Okay, we're going to circle back to that in a minute. But Jamie, how about you? Top 2 stories. So.
Well, I mean, Brandon Johnson would definitely be one, and considering, again, who his predecessor was and all the ugliness that occurred during the election, it's been really interesting to see how the media has been covering Johnson City Hall, and it's not been good.
Yeah.
And again, it sort of goes back to your point of us telling the entire story and giving readers the entire picture, and I think we've been derelict in our duties that way. So I'd go with that, Johnson being one. And 2, of course, is like the ongoing Trump saga. I think it's going to, again, continue to sort of keep us riveted as he tries to, fight to be, to get on ballots across the country. And again, given what happened in 2016, I think folks are once again a little too relaxed in thinking that Trump is not going to be reelected. And it's a very real possibility he will. Again, I think we're not taking this threat seriously. I think things have been put in place since his presidency to ease him back into the White House. And I think, again, we sort of have to start paying attention and fighting back.
Right. Totally agree. Is there a story that you thought that was important that really that had an impact that didn't get the coverage it should have gotten in 2023 that kind of got short shrift? Anything that comes to mind?
For me, it's gun violence, right? I think that there's been a number of homicides that have gone down, but it's the coverage of gun violence that doesn't change. It does more harm than good. It really victimizes the most vulnerable members of our community. It creates a narrative that gun violence is specific to a geographic area and to a people, mostly black and brown. So I think, once again, gun violence was covered, but the problem is how it's being covered. Not enough focus on the responses to that social problem. And really, as journalists, analyzing the insights, the evidence of those responses, and the limitations in really looking to solve this problem. It's covered perpetually, but how it's covered doesn't change.
That's a great point. Jamie, how about you?
I would say housing. I think, again, we're falling behind in our duties to accurately cover the housing crisis. We have seen rents skyrocket. We've seen homes be snatched up by banks and private equity firms. And again, we're not paying attention to the danger there. Right. As our homeless population continues to increase, not only here, but across the country, what can we do, again, to make sure that the unhoused are taken care of? Right. And also, going back to the migrant crisis, we have to be more mindful of how we cover these things, and that, I think we're causing a bit of a divide, a bit of a division between certain Chicago, between Black Chicagoans in particular, and immigrants who are coming. And I think, again, we're sort of bickering at each other and not sort of focusing on who the real culprit is. In all this.
Well, I think even in the Latin community, right? There's been disputes around not my yard or what about our resource. I think we're creating divides between, the pool of people that are already under-resourced, right? And I think, I don't know, how should we talk about that? How do you think the media should talk about that differently? And how are you talking about it?
Well, we're looking to partner with journalists and news outlets in Venezuela, in Latin America, because the story of the migrant crisis that we're experiencing here in Chicago and the state of Illinois doesn't begin when they get here. It doesn't begin at the border. It begins where they're coming from. And so we need to get greater context in order to understand what we're dealing with here by going back to where it's beginning. So that coalition building with fellow journalists are going to help our coverage get greater depth so that we can provide the audience better reporting and better coverage so that they have a better understanding of the situation. That is also applies to lawmakers. You know, a couple of weeks ago before the year ended, there was a push by the city council to put to a vote ending Chicago as a sanctuary city. Right. That's going to also come up again, especially in this election year. You mentioned housing. There's a referendum that they're looking to get out of the ballot in the upcoming primary, which is bring Chicago home. Focus on increasing the taxes on properties $1 million more that would go directly to help the unhoused. These are the things that we need to pay attention on, and we need to provide greater context.
Right. And I mean, locally, like, you know, I think one of the things I love about Block Club is that we've been able to sort of look beyond the sensationalism and sort of look for stories that inspire people to take care of one another. Right. And sort of tapping into that, continuing to tap into that humanity is what's going to be the thing that sort of saves us.
Right. And I think that, you know, believe it or not, we are just about out of time. But what I want to say just about that point is it's so important because we forget. Because contention and makes news, but we forget that every day Chicagoans are stepping up to help each other and to make a positive difference. And I think it becomes really important for us and a wonderful point for you to make about Block Club Chicago, that we have to highlight those stories because we have to have hope. Otherwise, people will not come out and vote, and that will be disastrous for us. Thank you so much. This conversation went way too fast, but it was fascinating. You both are so thoughtful and so engaged. I really appreciate it, and I appreciate your coming in and spending some time with me today. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
We'll be right back with my final thoughts.
Hi, I'm Bianca Cotton. On the next episode of Behind the Confident Smile, I'll be sitting in conversation with Lakeisha Spike.
As occupational therapists, physical therapists, they are professionals in their field, but you are the professional of your child.
Join the conversation on CAN-TV Cable Channel 19 and streaming on cantv.org and CAN-TV Plus app. Experience the power of community television.
As we step into what is sure to be a critical year for the city and the country, I want to encourage you to resist the distractions that tend to push the news that matters to you most to the bottom of the heap. The loudest voices aren't necessarily the most righteous ones. Just because someone has a platform doesn't mean he or she or they are actually delivering news unaltered and unfiltered. Be assured that those who want to keep our communities uninformed or misinformed will be working overtime this year. It is each of our responsibility to this democracy we hold so dear to hold our leaders, our news organizations, and each other accountable for truth-telling and resisting the urge to allow the showmanship and razzle-dazzle of those with platforms, whether deserved or not, to distract us with silly games of smoke and mirrors, littered with sound bites that are little more than well-crafted, well-packaged clickbait. Far too much is at stake for our city, our state, and our country. Thanks for tuning in. Until we meet again, be well and well-informed. Good night.